Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So remember last year when Tommy Ten Names fled the country in order to avoid court, sunning himself in various Mediterranean resorts whilst encouraging his supporters to tear down our country? Well, it looks like he's done it again. He's wanted by the British Transport Police as a suspect in an altercation which left a man dying at a train station, and he just left him. Has skipped the country again. But this begs the question, given that Robinson only makes so much money independently, how does he afford to spend almost all of his time outside the country that he claims to be fighting for, especially when he claims he's bankrupt? Just where does the money he has donated to him go? But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So for over a decade, Stephen Yaxley-Lenn, more commonly known as Tommy Robinson, has been one of Britain's most divisive grifters. He's raised millions of pounds from supporters, frames it as a war chest, for his culture war, money for legal fights, for activism, for journalism, he claims. It was funded by ordinary people who believed they were bankrolling a cause. But then in March 2021, this man who claims to have raised all that money declared himself bankrupt. Now, on paper, he suddenly had nothing, which is a glaring contradiction which leaves a bit of a question that both his supporters and critics have been asking. Where did all the money go? Let's look at the paper trail. So, web of donations, the international funding, court cases and the allegations from former insiders to get to see where that money has gone. To begin with, we need to know just how much was coming in. The fundraising operation, it wasn't a simple donation button on a coffee site. It was a quite sophisticated global machine, according to reports. It started with his base, thousands of small, committed donors. These were loyal followers who sent what they could, often at great personal sacrifice, believing they were funding a righteous battle for free speech. The same people who insist that Robinson must absolutely have been acting in self-defence when he was seen by the body of an unconscious dying man, because they're a real threat, the day before yesterday, but didn't try to help him. Crowdfunding campaigns, especially during his various legal battles, have been incredibly effective, reportedly raising hundreds of thousands of pounds in a matter of months. And like all political grifters, Robinson particularly targets those who don't have very much money and mercilessly makes sure they have even less. After all, for a populist, this is a win-win. We see it on the left and the right, absolute win-win. You get enough money to live like a millionaire, and your supporters remain poor and therefore an easy target for persuading them, you're poor, you should be angry about being poor. Seriously, if I could make one appeal to people who are angry about having a low standard of living, no matter who is their champion of choice, stop giving money to millionaires. If they have a campaign they want to fund, they can fund it. Oh, we're sorry your kid's going hungry. Yeah, give us your money and we'll make it all better. In a few years, maybe. But small donors were only part of the story here, as a significant stream of cash came from powerful international sources. United States think tank called the Middle East Forum openly stated it's funding Robinson, acknowledging it spent, for example, $60,000 on legal fees and demonstrations in 2018. They even helped the Free Tommy rallies in London. Then you have the wealthy benefactors. US tech billionaire Robert Shillman funded a fellowship for Robinson at Canada's Rebel Media, which paid him a salary of over £5,000 a month. You got financial support coming from far-right groups and individuals in Australia and US and Canada, across North America. So like all great patriots, funded by foreign forces. And the revenue streams didn't stop there. Robinson made money himself from book sales, merchandise, speaking tours. I mean, these are what you would say are his own personal income rather than campaign funds as such. When mainstream platforms like PayPal dropped him, he then just pivoted to cryptocurrency. During one 2-month period in prison, he reportedly received nearly £20,000 in Bitcoin. Financial documents seen by journalists suggest that in another 2-month period, he received about £425,000 in donations. At various times, Robinson or his team have claimed to have raised as much as £2 million. Money was pouring in. The real question is, where was it pouring out to? A big chunk of the money, undeniably, has gone exactly where his supporters would want it to go. Legal fees and activism, or shit stirring as it's otherwise known. Robinson's life has been a revolving door of courtrooms and legal fights, and they're quite expensive, particularly his legal fights. Not that running foul of the law is a necessary part of his politics, but it is a very good way to grift, isn't it? Give me money, not for me, you understand, but because the establishment are trying to shut me down. Oh, and if there's a bit left over, I'm sure nobody will mind if it goes into my fund for spending most of my time outside the country. You know, those sun loungers don't pay for themselves, do they? So he's been tangled up in numerous high-profile cases. Most famously, of course, the libel case brought to him by Jamal Hijazi, a Syrian refugee boy. In 2021, Robinson was found to have libelled the teenager after falsely claiming he had been attacking girls at his school. The court ordered him to pay £100,000 in damages, with total legal costs estimated to be about £500,000. And there have been other costly cases as well, including multiple charges for contempt of court. His supporters argue that these are lawfare, the battles where the money is meant for. The Middle East Forum, for instance, has confirmed that it paid for his legal defence in cases that it felt were important for the public discussion of Islam. By discussion, of course, they mean the propagation of disinformation. Donations also funded his particular brand of activism. So you've got like big protests, rallies, huge personal security costs. He seems to forget the violent thugs are on his side. His failed 2019 campaign to become a member of the European Parliament, that was bankrolled by these donations as well, paying for things like campaign buses. It's a pattern of seeking very high-cost legal support. In early 2025, just this year, Robinson's representatives claimed that Elon Musk had agreed to fund his legal fight in 2 specific cases, and following that claim, they had to stop their crowdfunding campaign, which I suppose they were a bit disappointed about. So it's clear that a substantial amount of money has been spent on lawyers and campaigns, which is what his supporters want it spent on. But even with these huge costs, it does not account for the millions raised, particularly when some of these legal costs, in fact, a decent chunk of them, have been bankrolled by those foreign powers. Nor does it explain what happened next. So where it gets interesting is that the most explosive claims about the money haven't come from journalists or critics. They've come from people who are in his inner circle. So Calvin Robertson, for example, filmmaker, he was, very close to Robinson for a couple of years, creating the videos that defined his public image. He's since completely disavowed him and the far right. There was a series of interviews in which Robertson painted a fairly damning picture of financial chaos and personal enrichment. Robertson alleged he saw Robinson move large sums from donation accounts directly into personal or other business accounts. He described a system where there was very little record keeping at all. Huge amounts of donated cash allegedly withdrawn and given to friends. According to Robertson, after one fundraising drive brought in £425,000, he alleges that only a small fraction, maybe as little as 2% of it, was actually spent on equipment and staff. The rest, he says, was completely unaccounted for. Robertson has claimed the donation money was spent on personal expenses, including parties, drugs and prostitutes. Another former employee echoed those same concerns, stating, look, no, they weren't properly paid for their work. Robertson claimed that while he and others were struggling, Robinson would boast of being effing loaded and making mad money, while, of course, making very lavish purchases. The lavish purchases are undeniable. For his part, Tommy Robinson has denied these allegations, but you've got to ask yourself, if you add up those lavish expenses that are clearly personal expenses, doesn't quite marry up with the money he's making personally. He insists, or he insisted at the time, that he's always acted honestly and has suggested that these, former associates were pressured into making false stories about him. He stated he moved donated funds into a business account simply to run his operations. It was just resting in my account. But no independent audits, no transparent accounting. So then it becomes a case of one person's word against another. But there's more. First of all, there have been very recent cases of HMRC asking questions, I talked about this last year, about, for example, why some of Robinson's businesses have not been posting their annual accounts as they're required by law, and why some are suddenly shutting down for no adequately explored reason. But what isn't in dispute is one event that brought all of this into the spotlight, his bankruptcy. So in March 2021, right in the middle of the libel case against him, Tommy Robinson declared bankruptcy. This immediately raised a bit of a red flag. How can a man who's successfully raised millions in donations and clearly lives like a millionaire suddenly have no assets to his name? The bankruptcy meant that the £100,000 in damages owed to the Syrian teenager he libelled was not paid from his assets, and his legal costs of over £500,000 also became part of that bankruptcy estate. During a later court hearing where he was questioned about his finances, Robinson painted a pretty desperate picture. You know, he admitted to spending over £100,000 on gambling in the previous 2 years. Not quite in line with his claim about being honest about the use of money, is it? He's saying these former associates are lying about his use of the money for personal things. Now he's saying in court, oh yeah, I gambled quite a lot of it. He claimed he was sofa surfing and owed about £160,000 to HMRC. Then he was asked about his book, his 2009 book, Enemy of the State, in which he claimed to own 7 properties. And he said, it's a ghostwriter writing that. No. He says he likes to give off the impression that he's a successful man even when he's not. So again, Robinson says he's lying. He's not being honest with his supporters at all, by his own admission during the court case. Tommy Robinson says he's not honest with his supporters in terms of what they're getting for their money. He's admitting that they're buying a lie in terms of who he is and where the money gets spent. Literally admitted it in court. In fact, not just admitted it, came out with it in court. No one was pushing him to say it. This bankruptcy has only fueled suspicions that funds were being hidden, especially as he's continued to live like a millionaire ever since. How does someone who claims bankruptcy carry on for every year afterwards living like a millionaire? Insolvency practitioners have pointed to a fairly murky business practice of Robinson and his associates, who created multiple companies that were later dissolved. One company, Hope and Pride Limited, went into liquidation in 2023 with liabilities to HMRC of like £300,000 for corporation tax. It's a tax bill that implies that profits of over £1.6 million must have passed through that company, according to reports. And the liquidators report noted that the company's financial records don't explain when or how those funds were used. You know, and this use of multiple opaque companies makes tracking the final destination of those donations nearly impossible. So where does Tommy Robinson's justice cash really go? The evidence suggests a big mystery box. A portion of it, yes, absolutely goes where it's supposed to, funding his very real and very expensive legal battles, even though I say we know that wealthy benefactors have fronted a lot of those. So even then, we don't know how much of those donations have really funded his legal battles or his campaigns or his activism. But like I say, if hypothetically you wanted to bring in large sums of money, let's say you wanted to carry out a scam where you wanted to bring in large sums of money, because if you're going to cream off even just like a few percent's maybe not noticeable. So if you want that few percent to be a lot of money, you need to raise a lot of money, right? So what would you do? Well, you need to present really expensive campaigns to your supporters, really high stakes expensive campaigns, like legal trouble. But a second untraceable portion is just vanishing into a financial black hole. It flows into a web of personal accounts and cash withdrawals, widely reported allegations from former insiders that it was funding the lifestyle of a millionaire, a world away from what it was donated for. And finally, a significant amount seems to be shielded behind a wall of weird company structures, very opaque company structures, and a convenient bankruptcy that leaves way more questions than answers. You know, for the thousands of supporters who donated their hard-earned money, the reality is there's no transparency about where that money's used. You know he's living a lavish lifestyle. That's obvious. His lifestyle is very, very, very expensive. There are no audits. He doesn't make that much money himself. There's just a trail of broken financial promises and the word of a man who openly admitted in court that he's been lying to his supporters for years. He deceives his supporters. That was his defence in court. With millions raised and a trail of financial chaos in his wake, the question is no longer just where the money went, but who, if anyone, is ever going to be held accountable. Maybe HMRC are having one of their interminably long investigations, which in a few years' time might actually corner him and his helpers at some point. Because remember, his businesses now essentially have other people named as directors because, well, when you declare bankruptcy, you're sort of not, you've got limited options for having your own business interests, we put it that way. Still, not doing bad, is he? For a bankrupt sofa surfer, when he's not in prison, he's sunning himself on the coastal resorts of Europe, all paid for by a combination of rich foreigners and poor Brits. Patriot my arse. Man of the people, my big fat hairy arse. But let me know what you think in the comments below. For more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.